What up? In our recent video about Harvest, we mentioned that we'd tried several unsuccessful farm strategies here in Mirage League and asked if people wanted to hear about them. The resounding answer was, yeah, show us a supercut of some failure, please. So here you go, that's the intro. So let's go ahead and get into it, but first, of course, help us out with the usual YouTube busy work, like, subscribe, and hype the video if you're on mobile. This all tells YouTube to show our content to more people, which really does help us out. Alright, so we'll start with a disclaimer as well. This doesn't mean that these mechanics are absolutely incapable of working or like, I don't know, that they can't be good with some tweaks or maybe some better RNG, but just like for our experience with them, they were either super unsuccessful or just miserable to do. So let's start with the worst one, the first one, the one that we've gone back to, well, twice initially, and then I realized in looking through to make sure I had footage of everything, had footage of everything else, but I didn't have any footage of Abyss. So I've actually done Abyss 3 times now, suffered through doing Abyss. So what we tried to do with Abyss, the idea with Abyss was basically just to use it to put a bunch of monsters into maps, right? So the Scarabs are kind of good at spawning monsters, like just to take a look at some of the basics here. The Abyss Scarab, it puts more Abysses into your maps. The Multitudes puts more monsters into the Abysses. This is sounding good so far. The Atlas passive tree for Abyss, as you can see, baited a 3rd time. It has a bunch of stuff that sounds pretty good. Puts a bunch more monsters into the maps, gives you extra XP. We did first kind of play around with this instead of Breach to see, like, can this compete with Breach for XP? The answer is no. And the reason we thought it would work is, you know, yeah, it is kind of like Breach, right? Like, why is Breach good? Breach spawns a lot of monsters. It also has the tree, but mainly it just spawns a lot of monsters really easily in your maps. Abyss does that too, you know, you got all of this stuff up here. Why not? The reason it didn't really work for us is that Abyss is terrible at actually spawning the monsters quickly. It's very slow. Like when you run over the Abyss line, it moves around slowly, spawns monsters. Maybe it'll form a pit that spawns a bunch of monsters all at once, and it'll kind of bounce around and do that a bunch of times. And then ideally it'll end, especially if you are running the Abyss Scarab of Edifice, it'll pretty much be guaranteed to end in a Stygian Spire. The issue with the Stygian Spire is that it goes against everything that Abyss wants you to do. Abyss is built for you to kill all the monsters quickly so that it doesn't, like, fizzle out prematurely and fail. The Stygian Spire, on the other hand, spawns monsters very slowly, and as you kill them, it will slowly whittle away the Stygian Spire's health pool. It can spawn a lot of monsters. The problem with it is, it has a health pool, it's very easy to kill. So the idea here is that you would do tons of damage all the way through, following the Abyss around, then the Stygian Spire would spawn, and you would completely stop all damage, and just kill the monsters as they spawn, and not chain or AoE any of that damage over to the Spire. This is completely unrealistic, right? And so playing with the Abyss Scarab of Edifice, this is kind of redesigned from the previous versions of Abyss, where there was the Scarab that would cause like a bunch of crappy little chests that would spawn on the ground, and for attack-based builds, it was basically like unusable. But for caster builds, you could take this caster mastery up here that would give you a chance to open nearby chests when you would cast a spell, and they don't have a lot in them. They're basically just crappy little chests. They don't exist anymore, but for a long time they did. But you know, when you have like hundreds of those on a map, that can spawn some divines, right? And it was a very cheap way to make a lot of currency on a caster build. With that no longer existing, and instead this Abyss Scarab of Edifice now just spawning a bunch more of these like minor Stygian Spires, or I think they're called just Abyssal Spires, they basically just die instantly and give you a 1 chaos Stygian Vice, right? So not great. We also thought that maybe this would be good in the Mirage, because sometimes the Mirage Abysses will just not move around at all, which saves a lot of the annoying aspects of Abyss. But the Abyss mods on the Stygian Vices are not great. They like kind of buff the effect of the socketed jewels, but like, I don't know, they're not really anything anybody's super excited about having, and they're a drop-only mod, so you can't really like roll and craft with them without like a lot of currency spent on meta crafting, so it just wound up kind of being bad. But of course that's not enough, right? I think I've eaten all of my lightless astrolabes and I don't really want to eat any more. But this is where things get worse. So the lightless astrolabe, the way that this actually works is you have to successfully complete all of the maps within the shaped region, and by doing that you have to do every single one of the abysses successfully to completion. So the problem is sometimes the Abyss will just like bug out It'll just decide, I've tried to path into somewhere that I'm not allowed to go, I'm not going to work anymore, and that just completely fails this. Also, if you try to do multiple abysses at the same time, unlike with Breach, where you can very easily overlap them and have no issues, abysses will just go all over the place. And you kind of have to stay near them and kill stuff pretty quickly in order to prevent them from failing, so I'll throw some footage in of failing, and boy, that's annoying too. So it's just, by design, it forces you to be slow, while also making you want to be quick, up until the very end when you then want to slow way down. So it's really just a terrible mechanic, just top to bottom, terrible mechanic, and honestly, I think what we would like to see GGG do really is just nuke the entire mechanic from orbit. The thing that's so frustrating with the state of Abyss is there are actually some good Astrolabe modifiers too, like there is some promise for Abyss. PoE 2 Abyss is super good, but a lot of the reason for that is it doesn't move around and it affects all the other mechanics around it in a pretty large radius, which is actually a lot like Mirage. So the alternative here would be, if it didn't move around the way that it does, that would be great. Even if it still did, but the Stygian Spires just had like a damage immunity or a heavy damage reduction that faded over time like Torment Ghosts, that would really go a long way toward making Abyss a much more playable mechanic than it currently is. And, you know, with the state of PoE 1's development, they were probably not in the business of like throwing away old content for nothing, so that maybe is a more realistic approach than just nuking the entire mechanic from orbit. But honestly, after the last few years of Abyss being what it is, I don't know, I could go either way. Alright, so the second mechanic that we messed around with was Blight. So what we wanted to do, what we tried to do with Blight, was basically just farm like a bunch of Blight Ravaged maps, and especially a bunch of Blighted oils. So the reason that we thought this would work, right, is we just looked at the Astrolabe modifiers for Blight, saw that there were like some pretty good things. We saw that the redesign to Blight in this league was kind of optimized toward the things that we want, like just to show the tree, and this is not a Blight tree, but just to show some of the nodes in the tree. Like they just got rid of some of the nodes that gave you like increased number of monsters spawned from Blight, and instead like increased quantity of items. They also buffed immune response to make it so that it would spawn monsters even faster. So not as many monsters spawning, the mechanic goes even faster in maps. This sounds pretty good, right? The issue is, there is no Toxic Sewer in this league, and Toxic Sewer is just kind of like a silver bullet for Blight. It just has a pretty good chance of only giving you like 1 or 2 lanes. And one of the things about Blight that's like really weird is you're guaranteed to always have 1 Blight chest lane, and if you have more than 1 lane, then that kind of dilutes the amount of good rewards, because the best rewards from Blighted chests at the end are Blight rewards. So if you can get 1 lane, that's ideal. Unfortunately, there just aren't really very good maps for Blight this league. Like, we did play around with Defiled Cathedral and Haunted Mansion, and they were okay. But, you know, ultimately this is kind of the reason why the Blight scarabs are all pretty cheap. So just to kind of hit on those. Blight Scarab of the Blight Heart is kind of the weird, like, odd man out that probably needs to die. This is such a weird scarab. Basically what it does is it kind of gets rid of the Blight aspect of Blight in terms of, like, rewards. It just gives you a random reward chest, and then it makes all of the lanes in the Blight spawn, like, tons and tons more monsters. It makes it last longer, makes it into kind of a very different mechanic where you want to, like, scale wisps and a bunch of other stuff off of the monsters. And that's fine, but the Blight reward structure is basically annihilated by this scarab. So honestly, this is the one that we would like to see just like completely reworked. The other two, though, they're pretty interesting. Blight Scarab of Blooming, giving you like more bosses, giving you more like, you know, you have to do more damage, but then giving you like more Blight Ravaged maps. That's pretty cool. In the past, this is something we've played around with and gotten like a decent couple of farm strategies with a lot of Blight Ravaged maps, but nothing super special. In doing it this time around, we just never really had any like big jackpot maps at all where we're like getting 15, 20, 25 Blight Ravaged maps in a single map. Like we never had any impressive jackpot drops, and in doing a handful of sets of Astrolabes, we never got a single golden oil either, which was super disappointing. We got a couple of random divine orbs, but nothing great. And that was kind of the same situation with Abyss as well. Like, the last cycle of Abyss, the one that I did like an hour or so ago, for the purposes of getting footage, I got 3 divines in the span of like 5 maps. None of them came from Abyss monsters, but that was it. Those were the 3 divines that had come from, at least that I can recall, from any Abyss maps at all this league, which is really disappointing. And that was pretty similar to the situation we had with doing Blight. It was very low cost to do Blight, other than the Astrolabe. And it was also low reward. That's not a good strategy. So Blight Scarab of Invigoration is another thing where it's like, it sounds kind of cool, and if you're able to get a ton of empowering towers overlapping on monsters, and then you combine that with something like Blight Heart, where you have tons and tons and tons and tons of monsters, you can turn it into a strategy that just drops a bunch of random junk. And maybe you can use like Titanic Scarabs or Wisp Scarabs to make it drop a bunch of stuff, but it just kind of doesn't really fit in with the like Blight chest reward structure in a way that's like interesting, or you're not getting a lot of value out of oils. And that's something we can even look at in like PoE Ninja, to just say like, the value of oils, it isn't really there for how rare gold oils are. Like, if you get a gold oil, that's actually kind of a big deal, like in terms of RNG, the frequency of those dropping in a Blight map. Not like a blighted map, just like a tier 16 map that has a Blight event in it. And there's like a divine. And the reason for this is that ultimately, like Blight oils, you need 3 of them for your amulet. Maybe you go through a couple of amulets on the lifespan of a character. Maybe you play a couple of characters throughout the span of a league. There's just not that much demand for oil. There's not anything else really to do with them unless you want to anoint your rings, or you're wearing some Blight uniques, or the new Blight belt. But even then, again, okay, that's 1 extra piece that you're going to maybe use on a couple of characters. Like, there just isn't that high of demand for oils, and so they're just really not all that expensive. Not to mention that you also do get a lot of Blight oil from other stuff like Delirium, and just, the majority of other mechanics do also still drop oil. So yeah, just not that hard to come by, and the demand isn't high. That's kind of a bad combo. Not to mention that Toxic Sewer wasn't in this league, so that all just really didn't work out super well. Ultimately, this was a less offensive situation for us than Abyss. It's not like some horrible mechanical failure with Blight. It just didn't feel super rewarding currency-wise. It's pretty good at low budget, it just doesn't compete at high budget, and really the issue is the Scarabs. There need to be some kind of better Scarabs for Blight. If there was a Scarab that kind of allowed you to turn any map into Toxic Sewer, would just say like, this map has 1 lane in it with Blight monsters, or 2 lanes or something, or all of the rewards are Blight chests, like Blight reward chests, like that could be good. But as it currently exists, most of the Blight Scarabs are just kind of disappointing for any sort of high level strategy where you still want the Blight reward structure to function correctly. The next disappointing league mechanic that we tried to play around with was the sort of turbo expedition strategy that we had kind of talked about coming into the league with the addition of the new Expedition Scarab of Infusion. And we were just trying to like min-max Expedition, make it as hard as possible. It's probably the hardest content in the game, and it's got to be like the least rewarding content in the game for the level of difficulty that it's providing as well. I guess Delve is harder, but like this is the closest thing you're going to find to Delve, like 6,000 level Delve in a map, and it's closer to like level 60 Delve in terms of reward. So you're running double rune finding, so you get tons of runic monsters, and then you do Verisium Powder for larger explosive radius, Expedition Scarab of Infusion for increased difficulty and reward for each remnant, and you're using Astrolabes, Expedition Astrolabes, and then you're also using Expedition Scarab of Archaeology to make sure all the remnants have like 3 downsides on them. I think potentially 4 with Atlas passives. You can potentially get up to 4. Maybe you can get even more with Astrolabes. I'm not sure. I know. Yeah, I guess potential for an extra modifier. But that's suffix. I think suffixes are all upsides if I remember correctly. So yeah. Anyways, extra remnants though. So the issue with this is kind of similar to the issue with Abyss, where you don't have to hit all of the remnants, but you do have to hit at least 50% of them in order to succeed, which means there's a real possibility that you can fail on the Astrolabe requirement, and that's really not a great feeling. But with the way that a lot of the downsides on Expedition remnants are just, you are not allowed to do this. You're a build that does chaos damage, it makes all the monsters immune to chaos, or you're an attack build, this will give all the monsters 90% block chance, you know, stuff like that, where you just really want to avoid that. And sometimes they're just laid out perfectly in the middle of the arena, and it's just, you have to miss like 50-60%, and that means you're missing too many remnants, and there's just no way around it. So I guess the one fix would be to not run Big Boom, but then it's going to be slow and really tedious, and just, you know, you're going to miss out on a ton of stuff that way. So ultimately, this just didn't work. It was very, very slow and painful. I mean, we could have played around with maybe taking an attack mastery to make it so that monsters couldn't block attacks, and that would have made this like a little faster at least, but it was still very painful and just super unrewarding, right? Ultimately, with all of the buffs to ground loot in this league that have been very successful and made this league really fun, that was an indirect set of nerfs to Tujin and Rog and all of the Expedition NPCs, which is okay. They're still okay on low budget at the start of a league, but as a super expensive or super painful high budget approach, high difficulty approach, I guess, you know, this isn't actually expensive to set up. It just isn't very good. So Mirage logbooks are worth a lot. That was the one thing we were hoping could maybe make this be good, is that Mirage monsters have a chance to drop logbooks, have this implicit that gives you a guaranteed Afarud commander in the logbook, and then that will drop special timeless jewel, and that could be like worth a fair bit. We didn't actually have high hopes that this was going to be good though. This is the one strategy of the 4 that we were like, we're doing this more just to see if it's fun. It didn't really work for us because ultimately the drop rate on those logbooks was not great. We didn't get one in all of the maps that we did. We didn't get a single one despite killing a lot of miraged monsters. Ultimately, I don't really know that there's anything GGG can do to fix Expedition as a high difficulty strategy other than maybe buffing Tujin, which kind of would not be great for the game, especially with the great success of this league. So I don't really know that there's any needed fix. Maybe just tone down some of the pain points on some of the Remnant mods, or maybe just leave it as it is and it's okay that this is just not a great strategy. And then the final strategy that we tried to do was Catalyst farm with Ultimatum. So the reason we thought this would work is that Catalysts are worth a lot, right? So ultimately the reason that this didn't really work that well for us, it didn't wind up being worth making a video about, is the same reason that Blight didn't wind up really being worth making a video about. You don't actually need that many catalysts. So there is a challenge for using the Dextral and Sinistral catalysts, the ones that come from the Mirage version of Ultimatum, and they are interesting, right? You can use them to buff all the prefixes or suffixes rather than like resistance or life or whatever other mods. That's actually quite good and quite cool. Like, that would be cool of GGG to carry forward into future leagues. However, the rest of the catalysts aren't really worth a lot because, just like with Blight oils, you don't really need a lot of them. Another issue is that we tried several different map layouts, and Ultimatum spawned outside of the Mirage and a bunch of the different map layouts, which is pretty frustrating. You know, the scarabs that we used, I think I used all of the Ultimatum scarab of catalyzings that I had, but those are not super cheap. The other scarabs that we used were bribing, and then we did play around with doing the dueling, so like, you know, 2 bribing to guarantee that all of your Ultimatums start as though you've completed like several additional rounds, and then dueling also to guarantee the boss, but then you can hit on the Astrolabe, you can hit that as a bonus from the Chaotic Astrolabe. Another big issue is that a lot of the Chaotic Astrolabe modifiers are just really, really bad. Especially if you're trying to do the catalyzing scarab setup, then like getting increased chance to be currency or divination cards or increased number of monsters or any of that is totally worthless. Like, increased chance to be duplicated, that's pretty useful. Chance to have the boss is okay, but then you take that scarab and you put it away. I guess you could just use like a mortal fragment or something. But yeah, it's kind of like a 50-50 shot of the Astrolabe modifiers either being somewhat good, like additional round, chance to be duplicated, or just like legitimately being like worthless, you know? So that was kind of frustrating, along with the relatively high cost, and the fact of the matter being that just the non-Mirage version of Ultimatum basically just didn't really feel like it was worth doing, in the sense of you need to do it to be able to guarantee that you're going to at least break even, but it didn't feel like it was ever really generating a big profit. Even when it hit, it just didn't feel like it was like generating a big profit. I have sold a lot of the catalysts that I've farmed already, as you can see, especially the Fertile and Prismatic ones. You can re-roll them with the Harvest Crafting Bench, or by 3-to-1ing them at a vendor. I don't remember what kind of Juice it costs, yeah, it costs yellow juice, so no way that's worth it. But you can vendor them, and that's okay, but not amazing or anything. So yeah, ultimately a lot of these like low value ones they're gonna probably sit here until the end of the league, unfortunately. The two really valuable ones though, the ones that come from Mirage, Dextral, and Sinistral, they're really good. They're just not common. They are not common at all, and that was our experience. So the Mirage version of Ultimatum was pretty good, but not great, and it was not always a hit. You can always do Mirage maps if you wanted to, like fully Mirage maps, but we wanted to go with 8 mod corrupted maps to have a much higher quant chance, and sitting there in hand rolling fully Mirage maps and then corrupting them and hoping that they go 8 mod instead of, bricking or whatever. That just didn't feel like it was worth it at all, not something we would want to recommend. So ultimately, our issue with this was just simply that it was like too much RNG, and while there were some big jackpots, like there were a couple of maps that made like 2 to 3 divs of profit, which is cool. It just paled in comparison to some of the mechanics that we had a much better time doing, and also it's kind of a slow and boring mechanic. Like Ultimatum, as much as you can stack the deck and try to take some of these nodes down here to like not have the stone circles or the survive mechanic show up, they will still show up, and that just sucks, and it doesn't reroll to something else different in the Mirage, so you get stuck doing the same bad thing 2 times in one map, which is really painful. So I think the only thing we would really point to and say, like, can GGG really fix this is, instead of these being increased chance, just make it so that you can, like, completely disable doing survive or stone circles. If that were available, never having to do the, like, really lame mechanics, that would make Ultimatum way more doable. Maybe buffing the boss drops, or, I mean, honestly, like, the simplest thing would just be, like, instead of it being, like, a full stack of a random catalyst from the boss, how about a full stack of a random catalyst and a full stack of a random currency? Maybe you get a stack of divines, maybe you get a stack of mirrors, maybe you get a stack of wisdom scrolls, like, just a little bit more, coming from that boss, since he is pretty slow to show up and talk to you and eventually let you kill him. That would maybe feel a little bit better, just as a bit of a gamble, right? So, right, those are the 4 mechanics. Ultimately, of the 4, Abyss is the only one that we really, like, hated. Blight, we didn't hate. It wasn't terrible. It just wasn't, like, great. It didn't feel great. As you invested more time into it, it just didn't really feel like it scaled up. Ultimatum was okay. It was just, like, 2 RNG to feel, like, good about recommending. And Turbo Expedition, there's just, like, no great potential for it to really be profitable. So, yeah, not actually all that great. Now, in terms of things that we do like, everything that we put a video out about, we feel pretty good about, but just to hit on the like really good standout ones, Collapsing Breaches are clearly still the best XP strategy, and very fun for currency farming as well. Deli and Beyond was really fun. We tried to create a pure Deli Mirror strat, just juicing Deli Mirror rewards, and nothing came close to Deli Beyond, which is fine. That's a really fun combo. Legion has also been really good. That's pretty close to the top 3. It might be in the top 3, I'm not sure. Essences would be the other one that's competing for that 3rd spot in the top 3. And then Harvest, obviously, is in our top 2. That's one that we're locked in on for the rest of the league, no question. That's on the set of the top 2 trees, sticking around. And then the other one would be King's March Bar Farming. That one's locked in. That's number 1. Sir Gog dropped a video about optimized King's March shipping on the same day that we dropped the video about optimized King's March bar farming, so it's just perfect timing for those 2 things to happen at the same time. Total accident, just a really good coincidence. And then probably our favorite thing that's not really a map mechanic is Delve. Delve was super awesome. It wound up being better than High Store Expedition as like a league start mechanic, something we totally missed on at the start of the league, and we definitely won't miss on in the future. Shallow Delve is arguably just better than High Store Expedition. It's simpler and kind of easier to do. Toxic Rain Pathfinder is amazing at Shallow Delve. You're able to farm crafting currency, regular raw currency, crafting bases, good basic early league start items like Curse on Hit Rings and minions or aggressive convoking wands, things like that. Unique boss drops are also really good. So Delve is super awesome. As this character has progressed further into deeper Delve, it's been really rewarding there as well. So Delve is super awesome, and being able to farm tons of Sulfite very quickly with King's March bar farming, just by swapping around 1 point in the tree for that, just dropping Refiner's Bargain and being able to get like 15 to 30,000 soul fight in each map has been super cool too, and you can just kind of bounce back and forth between that, fill up a bunch of shipments in, a couple of maps in between doing, a bunch of deep delving. That's been super awesome. So those would be our recommendations mainly. Harvest, King's March, and then, Delve has actually wound up being really good this league. Alright, so that's it. Those are our, big failures for the league. Thanks for watching, be sure to like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video, and finally, thank you to all of our channel members. If you want to support us and help us make more PoE content, consider becoming a channel member as well. Bye.